Morning, ladies.
So we're going to go ahead and get into our scripture reading and to our brief message this morning. Feel free to keep if you need to go fill up your coffee mugs or if you're still walking back to your seats. That is the nice part about a more casual, intimate service is we can be able to move around a little bit more. So we're going to read from Matthew 22 this morning, and I just selected a small passage for us to read. So Matthew 22, 34 through 40. And this is how it reads. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all of the law and the prophets." So a while ago, we kind of developed this theme as a church, and we have it on our little business cards and on the sticker window that we have in the front that gives our service times, and it's this idea of love God and love people. We talk about it a lot. And so this morning, I want to talk and revisit this idea of love God and love people. Usually I read a much longer passage. I'll read an entire chapter. And this morning, I just have a smaller one. It's good when we read those larger portions. I think it's good when we hear a large piece. That is how the Bible is written, is in these larger pieces. But today I'm only reading these few verses because I want to emphasize the simplicity of what is at the foundation of what God has called us to do and what God has always called us to do. We've talked about this before, but I just want to go over it again. We have this idea of love God, and this has been consistent from the very beginning of what God has called for us and wants from us. We've talked about it before, but there's this Shema. It is this prayer that God gave to Moses to give to Israel. And he tells him, this is the thing that I want you to put on your doorposts and your gateways. I want you to write this, and I want you to place it on your bodies. I want you to pass this on to your children. And it is this prayer, the Shema. It is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength." Basically, everything you have is to love God. And sometimes we end up doing a reversal of this, because in the passage where this is given before the Ten Commandments. This part, I love God with everything that you have, is given before the Ten Commandments. But we have a tendency to go ahead and say, let's post the Ten Commandments in our Sunday school classroom. Let's make sure that we have our kids learn the Ten Commandments. And we forget that this is the part that God said, no, this is what I want you to cling to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. And then we have this other thing that Jesus says. He says, the second great commandment is like the first one. You're to love your neighbor as yourself. And this is not a brand new idea. This is not something that Jesus himself was like, oh, this is a brand new thing. This is something that was considered even before Jesus' time. The Rabbi Hillel was asked by somebody to summarize the Torah, to summarize the Old Testament, the Jewish law, to summarize it while standing on one foot. That was the colloquialism to just summarize it, make it as short as you can. How would you say the point of the Torah is? And he says, whatever you find hateful, do not do that to other people. And that's how this very prominent rabbi said that's how he understood the Old Testament. So when Jesus comes along and says, treat your neighbor as yourself, and he gives this golden rule that we call it, or in this passage where he calls it one of the great commandments, this is not a brand new thing. This is consistent with what God has always been calling us to do. And so there's this man, and he's trying to trick Jesus, because here Jesus has been confronting and dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they have been purposely trying to lay traps, getting him to say something that they can call him out, catch him out as being wrong in. And here they're doing it again. There's a lawyer and he's asking him, testing him, is the way that it's phrased in this passage, testing him. And instead, Jesus gives this consistent answer with what's always been the case. This is what God has always wanted. And he even goes further and he says, every commandment and every prophet, all of the law and all of the prophets hang on these two commandments. They all are based on these two commandments. There's not also these extra things that exist. They all exist within this parameter of loving God with everything you have and loving your neighbor like you love yourself. And I can't help but kind of identify a little bit with the lawyer, because I get caught up in this too. I get caught up in this idea of, well, clearly it can't be just that. There's got to be something more. There's got to be something that doesn't fall within that parameters. And I think that this happens because sometimes we get lost in the details. So much lost in the details that we lose the main point. I think that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and even this lawyer who comes and tries to test Jesus, all of them were taught. They knew the Shema. They said it every single Sabbath at the beginning of their services and at the end of their services. They said this over and over. They knew it. But they got lost in other details, lost in other things that were going on, so much so that they forgot, no, this really is the basis. And I think the same thing can happen for us. There can be so many things that cause us to lose sight of what the foundation of what God has called us into is. One of the things that can be distracting or call us out of that space, make it easy for us to lose this thread, is just how much sadness exists in the world. Our world is now estimated to have a little over 8 billion people. And at every given moment, there is something happening in the lives of each of those 8 billion people. And with our current technology, we actually have access to hearing a lot of it. Not all 8 billion, but we hear a lot about things that are going in places that we never would have known about before. And the news that moves the most, the news that gets reported the most, the news that gets shared the most is the stuff that is tragic and sad and scary. And unfortunately, the truth is that we are just not built to process this kind of information. Human beings are not built to process the amount of negative, bad things that happen in the world. But unfortunately, that is what we are bombarded with every single day. And the fact that we are not built to take this in, but yet it is constantly coming at us, it takes its toll. And when we face such overwhelming sorrow and sadness, it's easy for us to lose hope, to lose sense of what is worthwhile, what matters, what carries us through to the next day. So something like a simple truth for guidance, like love God and love people, we start to go, well, that's fine and acceptable when things are manageable, but we are overwhelmed. Things are unprecedented. That's a word that we use a lot. That's surely what is going on now circumvents what God usually wants to be the case. Certainly there must be some sort of special circumstances and special calling from God for us in this time. Surely that's only for when things are okay, but not for right now. And the sheer volume of sorrow that exists in the world that we are able to access and hear about, this idea of loving God and loving people just doesn't feel like it's enough. And that's because it isn't enough. For us as limited human beings, we simply do not have the capacity to love what is needed by 8 billion people. We are not able to love with our limited capacity in a way that is able to defeat the global brokenness that exists. We have a small allotment of love in our lives and in our hearts, and it is not enough to overcome what is in the world. But the good news is that it isn't actually up to us. The burden of hearing global hurt does not change our calling to love our neighbor. The healing of the world is actually not our task in the first place. It is God's task to heal with his great love, and he does have the capacity to carry the pain from the whole world, everything. And this ability to process it and hear it all, this is not new for him. For us, this is something that's been never in the time of history to be able to hear the news of everything that's going on around the world. But for God, it has always been his ability to know that, and more, far more than we have the capability of hearing right now. He already knows what has been happening throughout the world, what has always happened. and he is not overwhelmed by the sadness. He has always known more than even those people who are involved in what's happening, and in light of this profound knowledge, he is still able to love enough to heal, love enough to overcome what's there. He has known since the beginning of time, and he has maintained this consistent and timeless truth that loving God and loving people never needs to change, because ultimately it is within his hands to be able to overcome those things that we feel are insurmountable. It is enough with him. It is not enough if we do it on our own. I think sometimes we can go ahead and go, okay, yes, that's a good reminder. Okay, it's actually in God's hands, it's not in our hands. We can be able to stifle that overwhelm of what we get fed every day by reminding ourselves that this is not new for God and he is capable of handling it. But I think we still struggle. And I think sometimes we struggle because it doesn't feel like we are productive enough. It feels like simply loving our neighbor and loving God is just not enough. We don't feel like we're doing enough things. And so we find ourselves falling victim to lies about what feels productive instead. Dr. Selleck, a Canadian psychologist, he explains that one reason we do doom scrolling and the one reason it's so addictive is because it feels productive. For those of you who don't know what doom scrolling is, I'm so happy for you. But it is this idea of being stuck on your phone and scrolling through reels, scrolling through Facebook posts, scrolling through memes, scrolling through articles, scrolling through news media. And it's just this kind of thing where for many of us who have experienced it, you get on your phone and you start flicking your thumb, and the next thing you know, it's an hour and a half later and you don't even know where the time went. Sometimes we're doing this at 2 o'clock in the morning when we can't sleep. Sometimes we're doing this when we just don't feel like we have the capacity to deal with an interpersonal interaction, when we're avoiding the silence that feels scary to us. We go ahead and we get on our phones and we just do this thing called doom scrolling. And part of the reason that we do it is because it feels productive. It feels like one of the things we're doing is we're becoming informed. At least that's something that we tell ourselves. We tell ourselves that, I'm consuming things so that I can become aware and I can know what's going on. And so that must be a good thing, right? We tell ourselves becoming informed must be a good thing. But spoiler alert, it is neither usually very informative, and it's very seldom actually a good thing. Sometimes this act of doom scrolling is something that feels productive because we have these feedback reactions as we're experiencing these things, as we're reading things, as we're watching things. We have these emotional reactions, and they make us feel like we're contributing something. The same reactions that we would have if we were out helping somebody, the same kind of reactions, emotional reactions we would have if we were having an engaging conversation with somebody and discussing an important matter. If we were out in public and we were encountering something that was occurring in a public event, we have this emotional feedback reaction that occurs. And instead of now having those out in real life personal interactions, they are now being manufactured online as we consume media. We have this idea of, I saw this video clip, or I saw this post, or I saw this meme, and I felt something. I felt compassion, I felt indignation, I felt irritation, I felt fear, or I felt hope. And those reactions that usually are reserved for what guide us in person-to-person interactions are now being evoked through media consumption. Those feelings that give us feedback about how we are contributing in our interactions in society and community are now interactions that are happening privately with a screen and not involving other people. We're still having that emotional feedback that indicates we did something productive, that we contributed something, but the only problem is that we actually didn't do anything in the process. I think the same thing can happen with our political involvement and our forming of opinions when it comes to specific issues. Caitlin Scheiss, an author and a podcaster, she specializes in her area of interest is specifically Christian ethics and politics, and she suggests that it is tempting for us to think that holding and expressing our opinions feel like we are doing something for Jesus, but that this is simply not the case. that this practice of forming and expressing our opinions are actually something that moves us away from the very thing God told us to do, which is to love our neighbor as ourselves. I love that she does this. I love that this is her reminder, because if we are substituting taking care of other people and actually loving other people with the idea that somehow we're doing something by voicing our ideas and our thoughts instead, then we're actually not doing anything for Jesus in that process. We're not being productive for the gospel. We're actually failing to do the thing that God asked for us to do. And instead, we're just lying to ourselves about what we're actually accomplishing. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that social media is evil and that everyone needs to get off the internet. Well, I do say that sometimes, especially in my house, I do. But I do want to acknowledge these are tools that have their place. There is a time and a place where being able to have this kind of information is educational, where being able to have the ability to contact somebody or to get information is something that's very helpful. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have opinions. Instead, I'm saying just we should be aware that these activities are not what we think they are. They are not what we feel they are. They might be fooling us into feeling that we are doing something that's worthwhile, but the truth is, Jesus did not call us into feeling like we were doing something. He didn't call us to feel like we were loving him and loving other people. He did not tell us to make sure that we just had the right thoughts and opinions about whatever hot-button topic there exists. He told us to actually love him and to actually love others. In this passage that we read this morning in Matthew 22, there's a passage a few chapters earlier, I believe it's in Matthew 19, where the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to find salvation?" And Jesus reminds him of all the things he already knows. He already knows the commandments. He already knows all the things, all those things that hang on loving God and loving other people. And the rich young ruler basically says, "Well, that's not enough. I need something more." And Jesus says, "Okay, then sell everything and follow me." And the rich ruler is sad when he hears this, because he wasn't actually looking for something more. He was looking for something different. He had known since he was a young child that he was called to love God with his whole heart and mind and strength. He knew that he was to love his neighbor as himself. But he didn't want more of the same idea, how he could develop it and do these things better. He wanted Jesus to tell him something different. Because for the rich young ruler, to sell everything and follow Jesus was more of loving God and loving people. So when Jesus said, "This is enough, love God and love people," the rich young ruler was sad because it didn't feel like it was enough for him, and he wanted to hear something different. And I get that, because sometimes things are overwhelming. And when they feel overwhelming like this, when we hear about too much brokenness in the world, maybe when we ourselves have experienced too much pain in a short amount of time and it feels like it's going to break us, when we have gotten lost in a maze of ways that feel productive that are actually not, but we're already so far down that rabbit hole, it can feel like we want to ask God, "Okay, this is now different. Give me something different. Give me a different instruction." And unfortunately, the bad news is that there is nothing different. There's just more of this same thing. Love God and love people. But I'm also here to say that there is good news here as well, because there is nothing different. There's just simply more of the same thing. Love God and love people. And this is good news for many reasons, but here's a few. First, we already have too many ideas, too much noise, too much that's coming at us, too much information, too much conflicting information. And so the fact that God's consistent and timeless truth for us is so simple, love God and love people, and the fact that that does not change no matter the circumstances, is very comforting. At least that's how I feel. To know that there's a simplicity in what God calls us to do, and that we don't have to worry about a few years from now after we've worked on it so hard that somehow it's changed and that's not the case anymore. When we're overwhelmed by different teachings and conflicting ideas on how to be a better Christian or what God really wants you to do in these uncertain times, we can just be able to say, no, God has been consistent throughout the beginning of time on what he has called for us. Love God and love people. when we are in doubt of what we are to keep and what we are to get rid of, what we've been holding on to, what we're carrying around in our hearts and in our minds, and we know that some of it just isn't working, we're able to do this thing where we can go, what does it fit with? Does it fit with love God and love people? Then we keep that. We hold on to that. Does it not fit with love God and love people? It's okay to let it go. It's okay to let it go by the wayside. We can get rid of it. And this isn't about being reductionistic. Just because this truth is radically simple does not mean that it is somehow a lie. It is still radically profound. And it is okay for us to build on this. And when we are in doubt, we can be able to let go of everything but this thing, love God and love people. It's also good news that this is what God has called us to, because when it feels like what is happening in the world is overwhelming, we simply have to love God and love our neighbor. When I say love God, I mean remember who he is. Remember he is good and able to indulge in his presence in our lives. The psalm that we read this morning, I think it's so appropriate because yes, there are times where it feels rough and it feels like things are not going and God's just not a part of it. But it is good for us to remember his goodness. And I love that phrase that it said, it's constantly in my mind. I'm constantly thinking about what you have done, God. This is an act of loving God, that holding on and clinging tightly to who he is, never forgetting who he is, what he has done, that is an act of loving him that we can hold on to. And this, when I'm saying this one now, love God and love other people, I'm saying specifically love your neighbor. Because we say love God, love people, because it works really easy, the two words, very basic concept. But what God called us to do is to love our neighbor. And I want to emphasize that part this morning. Because God is teaching us to love our neighbor, because we cannot love every single 8 billion people on the planet. We were never meant to. We are meant to love our neighbor, the people that we come into contact in our day-to-day lives. Everyone that we meet as we are going about living our life. The people that we have in our homes, that we share our homes with. The people in this room that we worship with. The people that we work with. People when we're out for a walk. People when we're on the bus. People when we're in the grocery store. People who are taking money for our gas or our food that we buy. This is our neighbor. These are the people that we are called to love. And we're not supposed to go out and make sure that we find specific people for us to love. Sometimes we do that, right? Especially as Christians, we better go find somebody to love, instead of realizing we have plenty of people that we come in contact with every day. That is enough. And in fact, we can kind of get caught up in it, and it's not a good thing if we were to go out and do that, because it can be tempting to go find specific people that we want to show love to. It can be tempting for us to go and look for certain people or certain types of people, to go to certain places and to position ourselves so that we can only have to love the people that we want to love. Sometimes we can even decide that doesn't actually mean who we encounter in real life in person, but we can limit ourselves that we can only have to love people that we meet in some sort of distance way, either through influence or through the internet or through some other way that we don't actually have to interact in person with people. But that's not what we've been called to do. Love and ministry through the internet or through means of distance is simply not the productive thing we think it is. We are called to go about our day, to live our life, and to all the people that we encounter during that time, that's who we are to love. And it's fine for us to admit that sometimes it feels like this simply is not enough. But it is. And when we find that feeling that this simply can't be enough, it means we just need to be doing it more. That we need to love God with more of who we are. And when we do that, he's not going to let us down. And that when it's time for us to love others, that we love others with what he has given us to be able to love with. And that when it feels impossible, that's okay, because nothing is impossible with God. And God is there to help us to thrive in this simple calling that he has called each and every one of us to do in all times. That's to love God and to love each other. Let's pray. God, we know, we hear this, we talk about it, we think about it. What you have called us to do is to love you and to love each other, to love the people that are in our lives, to love the people that we will encounter in our lives. This is most certainly not an easy thing to do. It doesn't always feel like it makes sense. A lot of times it doesn't feel like it is enough, God, but it is. It's who you've always asked. It's what you have always asked from us, God. And so we just pray that you sustain us in a way that draws us deeper into this practice, that you call us to continue to love you and to love other people, and that as we do so, you give us strength and confidence to do so even more and more each day. That every time we find peace and strength and joy and hope in loving you, and that you continue to give us what we need to be able to love other people, and that we don't need to be concerned about the people we cannot do anything about, that it's not about turning a blind eye or burying our heads in the sand, but it does mean that we understand that you are the God who is going to redeem and take care of everything, that it is ultimately in your hands, and it always has been, and it is never too much for you. God, help us to really, truly grasp that and cling to it in a way that gives us hope. God, we pray that we are able to find ways to love our neighbors this week, that we open our eyes to the people that we encounter each and every day, that we find ways to love them in the simple, small things and perhaps big things. However it is that you are calling us to love people, God, that we find ways to do that, and we do it with everything that we have. God, we pray that we stay holding on to this message in a way that grounds us, gives us hope, that even when things do feel unprecedented and things feel overwhelming, we know that ultimately you are guiding us. Help us to find strength and courage in this. In your name, amen. For our closing today,